Hi, this is Stephanie. I am sitting in the historic parlor of the Cashtown Inn. And with me is one of the owners, Jeremy Davis of the Cashtown Inn. Jeremy owns this with his wife Danielle, and we are about to take you on a journey of hidden history. So Jeremy, thank you for this privilege to sit with me. And we're going to talk. Jeremy's going to teach tonight. He's the teacher. So Jeremy, most people associate the Cashtown Inn with the Civil War, Gettysburg. That's how they associate it. But there's more.
Well, there is more, and that's a problem that we have here, and it's not a problem at all because we love people coming here, whatever the reason it may be. We love them to come. The inn would not survive without our guests that come here and stay, and without that, there'd be a big part of history gone. So, whatever reason anybody comes here, we're here with open arms and we welcome everybody. But there is a lot. We get very wrapped up in the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg, and that sort of overshadows a lot of other history that's here, like how this all started, how did this even come about, westward expansion, and we take that little trip back through time beyond the Civil War, and just in this local area, it's really neat. And I can only tell you what I know to be factual, and I'm not saying it's the way it is, because there's a lot of people that argue different points, and this started a couple years ago when we knew we were purchasing the inn, and all I did was I went on a little fact-finding mission just so I could kind of answer questions from my guests or to give some key points. I had no idea it was going to turn into what it has now turned into, which pretty much I'm here almost every evening with our guests, doing a little history, taking them on a tour of the basement. And it's great. I mean, they love it. I love it. But I think what really shocks them the most is for them to understand that they don't ever give it a thought outside of the Battle of Gettysburg. So, if we want to talk about this area, we have to go back in the 1600s. The Lenape Indians were actually the ones who inhabited this area. They were super peaceful. They worked with us when this was westward expansion. We were expanding into this area. The Seneca Indians did not care much for the Lenapes. Of course, Senecas didn't care much for us either, and probably rightfully so, given the history. But as close as I can figure and what I've been able to find, between 1690 and 1700, the Lenapes had an Indian village that sat at the end of High Street here in Cashtown, out by the new highway. And the Senecas had a war party moving east from kind of south of Pittsburgh, and one night they staged themselves on top of this hill known as Rock Top behind us. The following morning, they came off that hill and they went out into that Lenape village, and they slaughtered roughly 1,800 to 2,000 Lenapes, and they took 100 to 200 as slaves and probably traded them. It's a piece of history that's just forgotten. It's not talked about, and we can't throw rocks at our locals because the history's not there. Like, it's very, very hard. And I didn't find that on myself. Somebody else actually found that. I mean, I knew about the Indians and everything else, but as far as what actually transpired and what happened between the Senecas and the Lapes, I didn't even know that.
Right.
And
I didn't either.
Yeah, we live on top of the hill where they staged themselves the night before. So it's kind of crazy, when you think about that. This inn, everybody thinks this inn came about in 1797, and reality it didn't. Peter Mark purchased this place in 1795, but this inn that we're sitting in today was not here. Because in 1797, there was no brick structures in what we know now as Cashtown. This wasn't even Cashtown. There was a log structure that sat right beside us here, just to the west, merely feet from the inn. But that log structure is what Peter Mark purchased. So when he purchased this, that prompted a tax assessment. That tax assessment was recorded in 1797, And I feel that's why we have our
I
1797
see,
date
okay.
on our building. Now, this place wasn't even a thought until they started talking about putting the road in out here that's gonna go from Gettysburg to Chambersburg. And that was probably around the 1805 time frame. So, what happened there was Peter Mark went to his father, who was a businessman. He lived on the other side of Gettysburg, and he said, "Dad, if they put the road in, I'm gonna be a stagecoach stop. I'm 8 miles from Gettysburg. I'm at the base of the mountain. I need to build something to accommodate people." His father agreed to lend him the money, and they started construction on what we're in today.
Wow.
It was the first, we don't know the exact start date, we don't know the exact completion date. I have read some dates, and I do have information in my hands at the moment, but I really need to go through that before I'm gonna use those dates when I talk.
Right.
But, so there could be information out there, yes, I'm not saying there isn't, but as far as I know, I don't know the exact start or completion date. I know the road opened in 1813, I know when the road opened, this opened, was the first stagecoach stop out of Gettysburg, and Peter Mark only accepted cash, couldn't barter, couldn't trade, hence the name Cashtown.
Wow,
He
okay,
only did that because he had to pay his father back the money that belonged to him.
right, okay.
So, and I don't think Cashtown officially got its name until 1833 when the post office went in, so for 20 years it was a nickname. So much so when they built the post office, they were like, what should we name this place? And well, like everybody knows it by Cashtown, so they just named it Cashtown.
And that's how it got the name?
That's how it got the name.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Just because of how he did business here, so. It operated as stagecoach stop, tavern, right up through and beyond the Civil War. You know, we talk about westward expansion, like if you're on the northeast, looking to move west, packing up your family, not everybody on the northeast, but in a general area, like the probability was you were heading out this road. This
Right.
was the first transcontinental road to be built in this country. Started in, I don't know, 1700s and was completed in 1915 or 17.
The road right out front.
Oh, yeah, the road out front on the west coast. So, you know, if you're packing up the kids and said you had enough over here on the east, we're going out west,
That's where it came.
chances are you went right past this place.
Wow, okay.
Not everybody, but a lot of people.
Right,
Probably
right.
thousands of people did. So, you know, in '62, the Confederates came through here. That was 10 months prior to Gettysburg, and they came through, you know, Chambersburg, Franklin County, Adams County, and, you know, one of the things, along with many others, but one of the things that happened was I think they took but they took over 800 horses between the two counties. So, back in the day, somebody taking your horse, that'd be like somebody taking our, you know, our vehicle or anything
Exactly,
else. Like, I mean,
exactly.
that was travel, I mean, that was how they worked. So, you know, it was a big deal, and 10 months later, they're coming back again, and everybody in Gettysburg knew they were coming, everybody in Cashtown knew they were coming as well. And you have to understand, you know, like these people they were truly scared of the fact that they're coming back again after what happened 10 months prior. So anything of any value they had, they took it out in the back 40 and they buried it somewhere, you know, or hid it or whatever. There was two guys, actually there was more than two, I'm lying. There was a gentleman, Henry Hahn, and 4 of his brother-in-laws sitting out here in the tavern drinking that day. And Henry Hahn kept blowing off the mouth that he was gonna shoot the first rebel that came over the mountain. Well, he sat out here and he drank up enough courage. And he bled out of here with 2 of his brother-in-laws, and they went up the road and they picked another guy up. About 3 miles up the road or so, here on the left, towards the top, they hit on the left-hand side. 2 of them did, the other 2 hit on the other side of the road in the hill. First Confederates come over the mountain, Henry Hahn fired a shot from an old single-shot shotgun. I say single shot, an old black powder shotgun. A few seconds later, one of the Southern soldiers wheeled around and fell off their horse. Henry Hahn immediately, him and his buddy, they took off back through the hills of South Mountain. They thought the whole Confederate Army was coming after him. But in reality, the Confederate Army didn't go after him because they thought it was the North, and they thought they were setting a trap to warn them off the road and push them in the hills. So So what the South did was they came on down here into town and they demanded to know who shot their soldier, and if the folks down here didn't tell them, they were gonna burn the town down. Well, these people down here had no idea. It was a couple drunk idiots and went up the road and did something stupid. So once they realized that, the South came back up. They came in the inn and they made themselves at home. Nothing bad happened here. Jacob Mickley owned this at the time.
Okay.
His daughter and whoever else worked for him were all hiding up in the attic or the third floor. We're in 5 now. Once the girls realized the South was here to stay, they came down and they cooked and cleaned and went about their daily chores. Anything documented by any of them, they were all treated with the utmost dignity and respect. So
Good.
nothing bad happened here. I'm not saying what the South did wasn't hurtful to the northern local people, just as it was vice versa when
Right.
the North was down south.
Right.
You know, I mean, they were fighting a war. They needed supplies, they needed horses, they needed food, they needed water, they needed things to burn. You know, and they did what they had to do, at the end of the day, the South and the North both, so. I'm gonna say they were here, and this is really where things really start to get a little foggy, I'd say, as
Okay.
far as history books.
Mhm.
So, anybody that's watching this, you know, don't crucify me for it, cause I'm just gonna tell you how I think it happened. And if you want to, that's okay, you go right ahead, but, I think the South got here roughly 5 days prior to what we know as the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay.
It was A.P. Hill that day that showed up here.
Yep.
22,000 soldiers and Hotchkiss and that maker for the South. The South's artillery was kept in a field here just west of us, right on the other side of the house.
Okay.
Their supply wagons were kept across the road on top of the hill. Their encampments
Okay.
stretched down the spring, down through town. They
Okay.
also stretched to the north, clear out to what we know now as New Route 30.
Mhm.
And I think it was roughly 5 days prior. I think a couple days after that, there was a little battle. Some call it the Battle of South Mountain. I think there may have been more than one battle of the South Mountain, but
Mhm.
it wasn't far from here, which was between a couple cavalry units. And then, you know, how we end up in Gettysburg, because Lee had given all his generals orders to converge onto Cashtown. He'd given his generals orders not to engage the Northern Army. And, you know, we're always wondering, like, well, how they end up fighting in Gettysburg?
Yeah.
Well, on June 30th, Lee was in Chambersburg, 12 to 16 miles away. The morning of the 1st, Henry Heath decides he's gonna take a little scouting trip into Gettysburg, see what he sees, maybe get supplies, basically take whatever he can find, is what that kinda means, and then come back and
Yeah.
report to A.P. Hill. And all's well, you know, Heath leaves here, he goes 6 miles, he crosses Marsh Creek. As he crosses Marsh Creek, General Buford's cavalry unit from the north was coming out of Gettysburg, doing pretty much the exact same thing, I think.
Mhm.
I think the North was really shocked. They were trying to figure out what the South was doing, because they knew they came over the mountain, they knew they came to Cashtown, and then nothing happened.
Right.
And I think in their mind, they thought they were walking in this road, and they were going in there to fight.
Mhm.
And it really didn't happen, or, you know, I don't think it was ever intended to happen that way as far as the South was concerned, but anyway, the North was coming out of Gettysburg, Buford and his cavalry, and as he gets the Knoxland Road, he sees Heath's men who had just crossed Marsh Creek. So Buford's men fired some pop shots. It's quite a stretch down through there. And then Heath's men fired some shots back. There's a little marker there that says first shots of Gettysburg were fired.
Right.
And then Buford quickly spins around and retreats into the Hers Ridge line. So Heath, instead of returning back to Cashtown and telling Hill what happened, he just keeps advancing in the road, and probably in his defense, he probably thought that was local militia. He probably had no idea that was actually the Northern Army. Or if he did, he didn't care, but I don't think that was the case, because I don't think he would have disobeyed a direct order from Lee.
Right.
So he advances in the road, goes another mile, mile and a half, and he comes up onto Hers Ridge. And Hers Ridge actually has two humps to it, like a camel.
Okay.
So when we're coming in the road, when we go up the first one, there's a mini mart on the right, a gas station on the left, a little church sits on top. And then it drops down in, comes up again, and you have Hers Ridge, or Hers Tavern, on the right hand side. So I think Heath walks in the road and he comes up over the first little knob, and my take is the north is probably right there on the other side. And they're that close, naturally they're gonna just engage. And I think that's what happened, and I think he sort of realized he was in trouble because he wasn't supposed to engage the Northern Army for one. And he didn't want to retreat to Cashtown for fear of dragging the Northern Army back here because Lee wasn't here yet. So what he did, he stands and he fights, and he sends a rider back to the inn. That rider rides back to the inn. He tells Hill what's happened. He tells Hill they need more men. Hill releases more men. Hill also sent Hotchkiss, the mapmaker for the South, packing back to Virginia because they don't want anything to happen to him. And then he sends a rider to go find Lee, who over towards Chambersburg somewhere. That rider leaves here and he rides up the mountain, and the first group of soldiers he comes to is a group that was camped on top of the mountain the night before. Tells them what's transpired, that they need to get in the road as quick as they can. Those guys come down past the inn here, and it's way debatable. I'm not saying it's the law, but somewhere around lunchtime or shortly after. A lot of people mistake that as Lee coming down the road, and that first group that come down the road was not Lee.
Okay.
That rider continued over the mountain. He intercepts Lee somewhere, tells him what's transpired, and then Lee hotfoots it here as quick as he can. That rider couldn't have went to Chambersburg and notified Lee of that because there just wouldn't have, quite frankly, been enough time in the day. So Lee was already on his way here. He would have had to left sometime early morning hours of Chambersburg to get here when he did, whenever that was. I'm not gonna say exactly, but my guess is it's late in the day when he gets here. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Maybe I'm just gonna say 5 o'clock. I'm just gonna use a number. It's gonna lead us to this painting done by Dale Gallen, and that's when Lee first arrives, and he's talking to, A.P. Hill in the red shirt there. Longstreet's on the left over by the battle flag, and they're discussing what's transpired at Gettysburg, but they don't really know for sure. Like, they don't know exactly. And a lot of people think that from that moment on, that painting, that Lee leaves here and he rides off into Gettysburg, which I'm pretty sure he didn't do. In fact, I think he sent A.P. Hill into town to figure out what was going on. And Longstreet went with him.
Okay.
So, about 35 years ago, there was a diary found here, right here around Cashtown. It was from a lady who lived here at the time. It was found on Hilltown Road. Hilltown Road is our oldest road here in this area. It's right out here at the end of High Street before you get to the new 30. Hilltown Road was put in 1747. It followed an Indian trail and it went from Chambersburg to York. It didn't actually go to Gettysburg. Same road George Washington would have been on previous. But on Hilltown Road, there's a house, and that lady found a diary, some folks found a diary from a lady who lived there at the time, and she wrote that late in the day on the 1st, there was some Confederates in her yard killing a goat and some chickens. She went out with a broom and was beating them out of the yard. God love her. And a man on a horse rode up in the yard demanding to know what she was doing to his soldiers, and she said, quite frankly, they were stealing the food out of my children's mouths. I'm a widow with 8 kids, that's all I have. That man introduced himself as General Robert E. Lee.
Oh my gosh.
And then paid her with 6 pieces of silver to offset the damage, which would have set her up for quite a while back then. She wrote about Lee like a romance novel from that moment on in that diary. So we have Lee pegged late in the day on the Hilltown Road.
Okay.
Cashtown, we actually had 5 hospitals, believe it or not.
Really?
Which I only ever knew of a couple, and then I've just recently learned about others. Field hospitals, but nonetheless hospitals. So the inn was a hospital. We treated soldiers in the basement, and we moved them to our livery stable that once sat in the middle of our parking lot.
Wow.
Down in town here, about 5 houses down on the left was our local town doctor, Dr. Stem. Dr. Stem treated soldiers in the house and then moved them to the barn out back. We also had another barn down in town that was used. We also had another house in Cashtown that was used as a field hospital. And then right up just west of here, right up around the corner of the road here, not a quarter mile, is a place where a spring comes out of the ground, and they actually have a field hospital set up there as well.
Okay.
So, we had quite a bit going on in little old Cashtown. You gotta figure, I think the population might have been 150 people back then.
Right.
Today we have 259 people, probably 255 good people anyway that live here, so.
Right. So it wasn't big at all,
No, it
like
wasn't big.
population wise. Oh my gosh.
Was not big. Dr. Stem, our local town doctor, wrote a biography in 1886, and I happened onto this about 2 years ago now, I guess, a year and a half. Dr. Stem wrote that late in the evening on the 1st, Lee was standing in the field across from his house. And he said after a brief period of time, Longstreet came up and met him. We know Longstreet returned to Cashtown at the end of day 1. We know he brought back prisoners that were captured in Gettysburg. They were kept in a field between Cashtown and Jonestown. We also know that Longstreet came in the inn and made this his command the night of the 1st, because once A.P. Hill went to town, he never came back. Not that anything happened, but he stayed in Gettysburg.
Yeah.
So that makes sense what Dr. Stem had written, at least to me it did.
Right.
And Dr. Stem said that after approximately 30 minutes, both gentlemen left together. So in that 30 minutes is probably when Longstreet debriefs Lee on what he knew had transpired in Gettysburg. And when they leave, they actually didn't leave and come to the inn, but they left. And I'm pretty sure they rode into Seminary Ridge. And that's where Lee makes the final decision that they're going to fight in Gettysburg. I mean, if Lee, up until then, I can only imagine Lee had plans of probably retreating back to here and setting us up. He had Hotchkiss here for a few days.
Okay.
Hotchkiss was obviously mapping this out. I think in the time when the afternoon of the 1st, there late in the day in the 1st, that's when Lee was trying to go through all this, wrap his head around what was going on. I think then they ride into Seminary Ridge, and that's where he makes that final decision. He can see northern campfires burning on the other side of town, and he says if they're there in the morning, we'll attack. And Longstreet says, sir, if they're there in the morning, it's because they want you to attack.
Right.
So I think what happened then, shortly after that, they rode back to Cashtown. And I could not figure out for the life of me why they would ride the whole way back to Cashtown. Well, it was written that when Lee first arrived here that day, and we're gonna use just 5 o'clock as an example, that Lee had come that fast from Chambersburg, that his encampment, everything he traveled with, was still 9 miles behind him coming by horse and wagon. And I was like, wow, 9 miles in July in the heat, horse and wagon, pulling a mountain. We can call that 9 hours. So if Lee gets here at like 5 in the afternoon, I don't think his encampment really ever shows up here like 2 in the morning. I think that's why him and Longstreet rode back here, waited for his encampment to get here. I think Longstreet and Lee get back here about 10:30 that evening. And I think Lee's here till maybe 4:30 in the morning. Okay. And then heads to Gettysburg. Yeah. Everybody asked, did Lee spend the night here? I have no way of knowing that. I don't have it documented anywhere. Just like a lot of other southern documentation, a lot of stuff was destroyed after the war. So we don't have, if this was in northern occupied, we'd have a lot more than what we do. Right. So we have to rely, it's just a lot of digging to really get answers here. Right. But I think by 4:30, they're on their way to town. Now everybody had went with Lee that hadn't already gone into town except for Pickett. Pickett's men were left in Cashtown, not to guard the inn, but to guard this road down here that goes to the right to Fairfield. Now the South was using that as a supply corridor, and they were also concerned that if the North slipped out the southwest side of town, they could loop around by way of that road and basically come back in and flank the Southern Army. Now Pickett was left here to make sure it didn't happen, and it didn't. He sat here uneventful, basically whatever time he got here on day one. He sat here all day two listening to the fighting in Gettysburg, unable to fight. He was called up at the end of day two, only to march his troops to town and march them to their death the morning of the 3rd.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons he held a grudge against Lee until the day he died. And when I say called up, cell service just was not that good back then. So what they did, the hill behind us, Rock Top, you can still see today where the flag corps was located for the south up
Oh,
there.
really?
And they were leapfrogging the flag signal in and back from Gettysburg. And probably more than likely that signal coming this way started at the cupola at the seminary.
Right, okay, yeah.
So that would have been the highest point.
The highest
right
point.
there.
Yep.
And then came in this direction. I feel it's how Pickett was called up to be released into Gettysburg. So Pickett goes to Gettysburg, and we all know how that ends on day 3. Then came the retreat. You know, Lee and Longstreet and those guys took a more southern retreat out through Fairfield that direction.
Okay.
He put Bowden in charge of this retreat and sent the bulk of his men back here, 32 to 38,000. Primarily wounded, but not all. This mountain pass, 2 things. Lee did it, I think, as a strategic move on his part. He knew if the North was in any shape to go after anybody, which they weren't, but if they were going after him.
Right.
So that would have been more of a diversion at that point. This mountain pass behind us here to the west is a lot more subtle than the one where he went out. So to get horses and wagons and wounded, this was gonna be a lot easier transition for them than it was going the other way. They all made their way back here. As far as I know, they were all out of here by the end of the day on the 5th. The wagon train was 17 miles long,
Wow.
wounded and non-wounded, which is just hard to fathom in
It
today's
is,
time.
yeah.
Like, we can't even begin to wrap our heads around that. Everybody was taken from the inn, except for a handful that were left in Dr. Stem's barn. They were reportedly there for 2 weeks later, and after that, I'm not really sure what happened to them. But to think about this, it was raining, it was muddy, and if we were put on a wagon, if we were wounded, and we left out of here to go up this road, you know, it's not like in a car. That's why we can't fathom today what they went. You know, it was probably 5 hours before they ever got to the top of this hill. The other inns up the road reported that they could hear them coming long before they could see them. They could hear the men screaming.
Oh my gosh.
Which is just awful. You know, and you think about how many of them didn't, that may have made it through a surgery or whatever here, but once put in that wagon, that never made it to the top of this mountain.
Never
you
made
know.
the journey, yeah.
Yeah, it's, people ask all the time if there was anybody buried around here, and I can't honestly answer that question. We don't know. I mean, there could have been, I guess.
Sure.
I have no idea. Everybody asks me, what'd they do with all the body parts? Because the tales are always told. We have windows in the basement, and they threw body parts out there. And it quickly became an issue, and, you know, I'm not exaggerating that, but those windows are ground level, and it really didn't take much for that to become a problem.
Exactly.
So, you know, but what did they do with all that? Did they burn it? Did they bury that mess? I have no idea, you know, I really don't know. But yeah, they were all out of here, and then the real work, you know, came for Gettysburg, you know, the cleanup, you know, Cashtown, like, you can't even imagine, we can't imagine in today's time, you know, what that would have been like.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
the traumatic, just the stress that you're left with dealing with all that.
Yeah.
You know, it's you know, it's just awful. But it survived. The people survived. Jacob Mickley, you know, his daughter ended up taking over the inn in '65 from him.
Okay.
And then she had it for quite some time. You know, and the inns had different faces over the years, you know. I don't know exactly everybody, but you know, it's a Civic League library at one time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And yeah, it's been an inn, you know, it's been a tavern, an inn, it's been a private residence and tavern at the same time. So it's really, to think that it's come as far as it has, you know, it's pretty crazy. You know, the inn part of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, I wanted to get on that topic.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
So, and I don't know a lot. I know enough
It's
to be
okay.
dangerous when it comes to the Underground Railroad, I really do. There was an iron mill here in Caledonia, west of here, and that mill was like a hub. If they went north, they went to like Mechanicsburg area. If they went east, they went to Gettysburg. But when they when they went east, this was their stop. Now, where they hid here, I'm not real sure. I have one good guess. It's in the basement, but it's just a guess. But they would leave here and they'd make their way to Gettysburg, and before they get to Gettysburg, they would hide in a cut in the hillside. It's a cut where they were gonna put a railway and they didn't. And they used to hide down in that cut, and to the best of my knowledge, that's where the terminology Underground Railroad actually comes from. Now, if she watches this, she'll know who she is. We had a guest who was a school teacher that stayed here with us, and I told that story, and she told me I was wrong, and I proceeded to tell her that she wouldn't have been the first teacher to ever tell me I was wrong. And she laughed and said when she leaves here, she was gonna go find the answer, and she was gonna call and tell me I was wrong. Well, sweetheart, get on it, because it's been like over a year, she hasn't called. Yeah,
Really?
so I think I might be right.
You might be right.
I
It
might be
sounds
right.
right.
Yeah.
So the term was coined right here, Underground Railroad,
Between here and Gettysburg.
between here and Gettysburg.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thaddeus Stevens of Gettysburg was very good friends with Jacob Nickley.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I know they work together. Not a lot of documentation, I'm sure there's some on that, but, you know, back then in the day, they kept as hush-hush as they could.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, yeah, we've really had a lot, you know, transpire through the years here. There've been more Southern generals through that front door than any place north of Richmond. Maybe the only place in history where they all converged on the same piece of ground, not necessarily at the same time.
Exactly. I always think of this place as the seat of strategy. When I think of Cashtown Inn, and now, like when you go back, you went back to before it was even built, there was so much a strategy. Thinkers, you know, you think of Lee, you think of APO, you think of, you know, Pickett, and then you even go back further, think of the Underground Railroad, you know. It's just, like the walls talk, like, you know, they just do. It's living. This is living history.
It is. It's history that's still taught today. I mean, they still bring cadets here today, and they walk them in the upper part of the yard, and they discuss these tactics and this stuff, because a lot of this stuff, that general thinking is still used
Yes.
in modern times today. And when you think about that, like those guys set a precedence then
Yes,
that
they
we
did.
still follow.
Yes,
You know, that people say, well, that's when men were men. No, I mean, I understand where they're coming from with
Right.
that expression. You know, we have men today,
we do.
but we live in different times.
Exactly.
So, you know, 160 years from now, those people, what they're gonna look like or be doing, I have no idea. They'll probably be saying the same thing about us, so I have no idea. You know, it's really neat though to think of, you know, like you said, the strategies, and it's almost seems like they were so far advanced from their time, but they really weren't, you know? I mean, they were smart individuals, they were fighting
Yes.
for what they believed in, no different than people nowadays, whatever the cause may be. You know, thinking, you know, they were doing what they thought was right at the time.
Right.
You know, we can't hold their feet to the fire for that, because we all do the same thing,
Exactly.
so,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, I thank you. So one thing I would say, you can, this is open to the public. You have, how many rooms do you have here?
We have 7 rooms. We have 7 rooms, rentable rooms. So 5, there's 4 original rooms to the inn, which are on our second floor. Room 5 is on the 3rd floor, which would have been the attic or sewing room back in the day. And then there was an addition added on later, it's in the back, and we have rooms 6 and 7 back there. So we are open to the public, we love everybody to come and stay.
Absolutely.
We do a Sunday morning breakfast to the public, other than our guests. Our guests get breakfast every day, but we do open up from 9 to 12 every Sunday morning. We're currently working on, and I don't really wanna let the cat out of the bag just yet,
Okay.
but the restaurant in the very near future is going to be opening back up.
Awesome. Oh my God, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so anybody, keep an eye on Facebook, the girls do a really good job with keeping up to date there. If you see something on there that doesn't make sense or think who the heck did that, it's probably because I put something on there, but, yeah, so, you know, that's honestly, we tell everybody right now, and everybody asks, why don't you have more out there, why don't you do this, why don't you have stuff in print? And we knew when we purchased this place, it was gonna have to evolve into,
Right.
we only bought it to resurrect the history here, we only bought it to bring it back, because it was on a downward spiral,
Yes.
You know, it's how the town got its name, of
Yeah.
course, so,
Yeah.
you know, we were trying to do our part, and, if we could make it happen, we were going to, and we were able to make it happen, so. It just, unfortunately, we can only move as fast as the inn allows us to move,
Right.
so.
Right, you know, and for those watching, it is beautiful. Like there's people who, I always say there's people who renovate and there's people who restore. You restored it. Like you restored it. You didn't take away. It was just, you revealed all of the history to this place.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so peaceful. I mean, I walk in, sometimes it brings me to tears. Like I don't even know why, you know. It's just, it's beautiful.
Probably the smell of Jennifer's perfume.
He's joking.
Yeah, I'm
We're
joking.
just, oh my God. But I hope that those watching, you know, there's people watching that they may never get here, but at least you gave them a glimpse of things, information that they would not otherwise have. Like the Native Americans, the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, that's all stuff that plays a huge part. And there's, you know, we're kind of limited on time here a little bit, but, you know, there's a lot of underlying details and different things, you know, with Lee's original plan for here, with a lot of the stories, you know, with westward expansion and the times leading up to the Civil War, you know.
Right.
You could sit and talk for hours about that kind of stuff.
Well, maybe we'll have a part 2, and that's what
There you
and that's what we'll focus on. But I thank you
Yeah.
so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, and
Thank
thank
you.
you, Danielle, just for the privilege of being able to sit here and listen, and you share your knowledge and bring it all to life.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll end this for Through Their Eyes, Past and Present, at the historic Cashtown Inn.